Absolutely amazing and fascinating. Um, I love the concept of self-disruption from inside the organization. Do you want to touch more about that? Let's just dive into that.
For sure. So Jeffrey Moore, I don't know if you remember the cycle of adoption, right? So you always had the early adopters, you had then the late adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. And we see that in our own lives. Whenever a technology comes out, whether it was Twitter or Uber or Airbnb or WhatsApp, there was some of you in your friend circle, somebody say, hey, I've got this new app, right?
Mm,
And you think, oh, another app, and then
yeah.
all of a sudden it becomes necessary, and then everybody's on that app, and you have to get onto that app, right? So you could put yourself on that curve, right? Either you're an early adopter, but now what happens is sometimes you're an early adopter and it doesn't catch on, right?
Mm,
And it falls into the chasm of failure. And there's probably a couple of examples like that where you downloaded an app and it just didn't take off. Or you downloaded an app, used a certain technology, and you're so thrilled because you were one of the first in your community. And when everybody said, hey, I'm now on WhatsApp or I'm now on Uber, and you would say, yeah, I was on it like last year already, type of thing.
mm,
So the product adoption cycle that was developed by Jeffrey Moore was adapted for the internal organization. And he divided it up into 4 zones. And he said, you got the zone of, I think it was innovation, experimentation, the zone of differentiation, and the zone of mainstream adoption. Now, what you talk about, this idea of internal creative destruction, is exactly what a board, an executive team need to do, right? They need to decide where they allocate resources. And that zone of experimentation, in the banking industry, we ran a very successful code fest for many years, which is like a hackathon, but internally where we allowed our developers and business people to get together in a room for a week and to build whatever they wanted to, experiment with the latest technology. We separated them from the network and they couldn't break anything, but they could just go mad. They could do whatever they
mm,
wanted to and have fun and be agile and interview customers, and we had a little bit of a competition. And like we all know about hackathons, it's this rapid innovation under certain conditions that incentivizes people through competition or other means, intrinsic or extrinsic motivation, to develop cool things, right? Now, the question is whether you take some of those technologies and you put them in the main parts of your business, okay? And that's the decisions that managers and executives still have to make. So and that do they back a certain technology and a certain product line sufficiently enough to put the resources behind it that's going to cost them massively if it's a mistake, if it doesn't take off, if it doesn't meet their customer expectations. So this idea of internal creative destruction is one that Jeffrey Moore then expanded on that product adoption curve to develop internally, and one which I've used when I wrote a couple of papers about our Code Fest. And there's a research paper that's actually been done on it by Gibbs Business School, which is now available in the Harvard Business School research library for business schools to teach around the world. And it talks about exactly this question of, yes, you can play with things on the side, but when do you put them into your business?
mm,
And Google has a website actually called the Google Graveyard. And, what they do is they are very good at quickly assessing how successful something is, because it might be successful in a hackathon where you've only spent a very small amount of money getting a few people together to play around with technology. When you put it into a mainstream business, for some reason it doesn't work, and you have to quickly decide, do you double down on it? Do you change the leadership? Do you change the way you're offering it, or do you just get rid of it? And that's what Google Graveyard is products that have been through that cycle of internal innovation and internal creative destruction and has not survived. And of course, we're all well aware of the fantastic products that have become mainstream and which have survived and done exceptionally well. So, yeah, I mean, that's some thoughts around internal creative destruction, which I think is, as you say, a very important topic, and one that executives are rightfully very nervous of, because
mm.
if they don't adopt these things, other people are going to do it to take away their customers, and they're going to wish that they obviously had taken that risk and put it into the mainstream of their business. Another fantastic example is Google Glass, right? We talk about Google Graveyard. So Google thought, that people were going to wear glasses and have this little camera on the side, and through augmented reality. So AR is augmented reality. Virtual reality is an entire headset that fits over you. So that's then takes you into a virtual reality. But AR, augmented reality, is you're looking at reality, but it's augmented with additional information. So now no longer would you be listening to your phone to help you navigate. You'd put your Google glasses on, it would see the road, it would know your location, and it would then show you, just like if you've watched in the Terminator movies, it would show you additional information through these glasses as you're driving. I mean, and that was just one of the many use cases of it. The failure of Google Glass was quite simple, is that humans don't want to wear a GoPro.
Absolutely.
That's okay. And Google actually hired one of Europe's top fashion designers, because when they realized it wasn't taking off, they figured, okay, it's the human psychology of not wearing a camera on your face. Just they could not get people convinced that that was a good idea, despite all the benefits that you'd get from it. And they had to shelve it eventually. And it's become very useful in automotive manufacturing and engineering plants, where technicians working on a conveyor belt will wear a Google Glass, and they'll have information come up on that screen about what it is that they're doing, whether they're fixing an engine or wiring a circuit board or building a product, etc. So in the manufacturing and engineering space, the Google Glass has actually found some very viable use cases, etc. So Sarah, those are a couple of examples of household names, companies that we're aware about that have gone through these cycles of creative destruction. And often I think it's very important that it sometimes is not exclusive, right? It doesn't have to be or, it can be and. And often it's an evolution of an existing product line that adopts these new technologies in quite radical ways. It doesn't have to be a binary discontinuity. So in my book, I talk a lot about the creative cycles of destruction that have discontinuities between them. So you cannot innovate a candle to develop a light bulb. There's a discontinuity. It still solves the problem of providing light, but a candle to a light bulb is a discontinuity. So too from a traditional light bulb to an LED light, which is where the lighting technology is going. And the same for the horse-drawn cart. You cannot improve a horse-drawn cart to get to an automotive vehicle. If you were to ask the driver of a horse-drawn cart, what is their requirement? They would say, I want a faster horse. Okay? So when you talk about creative destruction, there's a limit to incremental innovation on an existing product. Just like a horse-drawn cart, you can put more horses on there, it's going to have a limiting factor. You need an innovative disruptor sitting outside of the product line that thinks about it completely differently and says, we need an engine instead of the horse, right? That's a discontinuity. And that's a binary creative destruction, okay? And one of the biggest reasons they didn't get rid of horse-drawn carts in America was because they said, well, what about the jobs of all the people who clean up the streets after all the horses? That was one of the biggest reasons in America that was holding back the adoption of the motor car. And so the horse population of America declined rapidly. And horses eventually moved back out into the farms and into agriculture as the motor vehicle took over. And when you talk about destruction, people obviously get worried about jobs. Now, Uber in South Africa has been a net creator of jobs. So despite all the headlines and drama that we saw around Uber coming in and taking over all the metered taxi drivers, if you ask your Uber driver, a lot of them are going to say, I used to be a metered taxi driver and now I'm an Uber driver. And they earn more, they have better work conditions, they've adopted that technology, they've moved up that cycle of creative destruction. Now, yes, the metered taxi industry, there was, the traditional jobs that were there had to get adapted into the new way of doing things, the new industry. And that's what digital transformation has to do, is to take people with on that journey and ensure as far as possible that they cross over the discontinuity, or they understand the adoption and the change, if it's incremental, to their lives and to the products that they support and to the work that they do, to obviously go with on that journey. And throughout history, Sarah, even back to the Luddites, which I talk about in the book as well, the cotton mill workers, when the cotton mill machinery came in and they tried to destroy it and protest against this new technology, net jobs were created through that. And I guess, it's only when we reach what we call, general artificial intelligence, that we feel there might be now, serious job destruction. But up until that point, everyone is generally agreed that humans adapt and develop new work that takes advantage of the technology and the creative destruction that's happened in the past. And we'll always move ahead of the technology and the creative destruction. And the companies that can do that internally and take their workforces with them are the companies that will be successful at digital transformation.
It's so great that you talk about the impact of digital transformation, because the moment people hear digital transformation, people think of loss of jobs. So it's actually very important that as practitioners, we can actually bring this narrative that it's not necessarily that technology is coming to wipe out jobs. In fact, in certain circumstances, technology is actually creating jobs. And I love that whole example that you give around Uber, and even Airbnb. More entrepreneurs have actually come into the market that otherwise would never have had an opportunity to run a business in the hospitality industry. So it's actually very important that, we center this conversation around the opportunities that technology brings, so that people are more aware and people are open to take up these opportunities.
I think you're so correct there, Sarah. And, it all comes back down to this evolution of humanity and how well adapted we are and how well suited we are to adapt to our environment and the changing circumstances, whether it's technologies or organizations or new products and services. And, in all the conversations that I have, and whether it's in a large workforce or, as you say, in an entrepreneurial environment, it's that adaptability, it's that understanding and awareness of the principles and the forces that are coming at you and disrupting your world, and the knowledge and the understanding of those that you can then use to change the way you live and work, to adapt them and to adopt those technologies to continue being successful, but in new and different ways. And that's really the thesis and the sort of principle and the practical application that I try and achieve with my book and with my courses and everything that I teach and talk and research about in my private capacity.
Fantastic.